Hello and welcome to episode 372 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. My name is Pilar and you can find out about everything I do over at virtualnotdistant.com. I keep getting that wrong, Maya.
After all these years.
I know. I decided to just say it for every episode instead of having the stock intro. And, it's quite nice to get it in time for the music. Listeners, we are recording at the beginning of December 2024. This is our last episode for the year. And it will be the last episode for a while the podcast system stabilizes and we decide whether it's something that needs to continue, how it needs to continue. And I haven't got a clue, Maya. But with me for wrapping up of the year episode is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. And end of the year, end of an era for now, at least.
Yes, we'll see. We'll leave it open. It has been 10 years since I started the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Yes, it's a very long time. So, yes. So, listeners, today we've got a little bit of catching up to do because we haven't been behind the microphone together for a while. And then we're going to go into Let's Not Blame Remote. So, a little bit... I'm in danger of becoming too whingy about it and using this to complain. But hopefully lots of listeners will laugh with us, will complain with us, and hopefully we can just end the year on a positive note, even through, I don't know, I have so many things to complain about. But let's start with the nice things, Maya, because you've been traveling, and you've definitely been doing some speaking at a place where, I don't know, did you ever think you were going to end up there doing this thing in Alicante?
It was quite a challenge for me because despite having lived here for a great many years, I don't work in Spain as a rule because I don't work in Spanish. And as I had to explain to this event, there is one downside to working remotely and working predominantly at home, which is that it does isolate you from your environment to a certain extent. When I said, yes, of course I can come and do a talk in Spanish because remote work is my territory. I can talk about that all my life, I don't need to prepare anything. And then suddenly becoming extremely aware of this huge gap between my domain knowledge and my Spanish was a little bit of a shock. So that took a lot of preparation. But it was a great privilege to, having been a remote worker in Spain for so long, I'd never really thought I'd see the day where a city council said, come and tell us how to attract more people like you, how to create a better environment to receive people, what the obstacles are for people to come here as remote workers, as expats, even as quite short-term digital nomads and working tourists. So it was really great that Alicante organised this event and they brought together international speakers with local projects and exemplars from elsewhere in Spain. And I think it was a really good brainstorm. I really hope that some positive change comes out of it. I gave them a few ideas, but...
That's amazing, though. It's great. It's really good that a council would do something like this. This was it the first edition of this?
It was the second edition. I think they did one a couple of years ago. And It was a partnership between the council and an incubator at the university. And it was quite a partnership event. Quite complex admin and lots of logos on all the slides. But, that is the only way to make change happen at a policy level. So it was really good to see.
Great, good. Well done.
Thank you.
Are you going to be touring Spain now?
I don't know about that. It was very high stress because I love speaking. It's something I've done more of this year and I want to continue to do so. But it was like going right back to basics. I ended up having to write the whole script out and then rehearsing it line by line with ChatGPT and sort of saying, no, I can't actually get that phrase out. Give me something simpler to say.
Oh, wow.
There's too many syllables. And, I did end up reading it, but there was a lot to cover anyway. And it was, not as spontaneous as I would have liked to have been doing the whole thing in English. I suppose it's a good reminder as well that this stuff that we think we know inside out it's new to people and it's challenging to people. And sometimes it's actually good to be reminded of that and put yourself back in that beginner's mind and the conscious incompetence from time to time, because maybe some of the people in the audience are that way when it comes to the subject matter.
Yes. I think that's a very good link between the language knowledge and the subject knowledge, that we have a gap. We might have a gap in the language knowledge. They might have a gap in the subject knowledge, which still, I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, if we link it back to the let's not blame remote topic, I think that this is the thing that I still don't think that remote work is understood in its best form. What is remote work? I think still, because of the experience of many people of remote work was during the pandemic, there is still this thing of what is working remotely? What is, especially at an organizational level, what does it mean to be a remote worker? What does the day look like? I'm really happy to hear that you're doing that. I hope you do more.
Thank you. Well,
you know, the first one's the hardest.
Yeah, I have reached out to, in Valencia, where I live, which, as listeners will probably know, suffered a huge natural disaster last month. And there is very much a pivot to supporting teletrabajo for workers affected. Obviously, people who can work remotely are encouraged to do so. So I've tried to connect with the incubators and the academic departments which are supporting that, but it's a little bit hard to penetrate some of the institutions, and obviously resources are stretched quite thin there. But I hope that if there's any way that, as Remote Work Spain, we can support that, and whether that's helping people get started with remote work, providing free consultancy or advice to organisations on how to implement it, and, you know, maybe hopefully encourage people to see this as a longer term measure, because we still have next to no public transport in the city, for example. Wow. It's still very difficult for people to get around, and the more that we can do to take pressure off that system by enabling people to work remotely, then, you know, that has got to be the long term goal. As you say, it's not just about short term solutions to things, it's about creating better systems for the future.
I think we've talked about this before, and it's something that's always been on my mind about understanding and adopting good remote work, because we saw it helped during one crisis, very specific crisis. But I think there was an acknowledgement as well that we're going to keep coming across short-term crises as well. And if we understand this way of working, it can help. It's just one more thing that can help.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this is Spain's third biggest city, was basically completely knocked off course in every possible sense in one night of rain. And sadly, this is going to keep happening. So the more resilient industry is in terms of work and productivity, that's by no means the whole solution to the problem, but it does mean, I mean, all of this is going to have to be paid for as well. The impact on the GDP and the productivity of the city is incalculable. So at least if smaller enterprises and public sector people could keep working through that one way or another, instead of being isolated in their homes, or I heard of somebody waiting for 3 hours for a bus, because the bus that replaced the metro obviously takes about a quarter of the number of people that the metro takes, so they just kept going past full, and it's like got to work at 2:00 in the afternoon or something. Well, what's the point of that? They could have been working all day at home and be safe and dry and not cramming onto that bus. So we really need this as a long-term project, a long-term acceptability, but it does mean overcoming some of these mental blocks that people have at an organisational level, as to really implementing a remote first mindset rather than this is what we'll put up with if we have to.
And so going back to the understanding of remote work, I think one of the mindsets as well is to try and understand what's possible. So I'll just bring in, I saw an article today and I thought, oh, this is going to be a great article. And it was called How Working from Home Can Actually Strengthen Bonds Between Co-Workers. And when I started to read the article, it was in the HBR, and it was all about online meetings. It was all about the informal information that you can gain from other people when you are on a video call with them and you see their homes. And I thought, really, that this is half of the problem, is that even publications of that level are giving this idea. Somebody said to me, my heart sank, and I thought, okay, I really must articulate what I think about work better. A friend of mine said to me, you must be so proud of me. I spent all day on online meetings today. I just threw my hands to my face in despair, like, no,
that's not what we meant. And we've been trying to say that for the last 5 years now almost.
No. So I think that is the first thing. And, you've been working remotely for ages, more than anyone. And even before you could actually hop on proper online meetings anyway. So you understand that there's other ways of communicating. But most people still equate remote, especially remote collaboration, with online meetings. And so until we get rid of that, there's no way we're going to progress. Yeah.
Yeah. And those sort of accidental communications you get about someone's environment, from seeing, oh, you have a nice piece of art or a lampshade or something in your home office. Well, surely there are better ways we can tell people about ourselves. We can make ourselves real. We can share. We can make ourselves interesting or vulnerable or engaging with other people than having to peer over their shoulders on what's in their webcam. We can do better than that.
I mean, that one is great. I mean, we always said it's one of the benefits, if we want it to be, of, you can turn something that might be uncomfortable into something good, but we don't have to wait for that. And that kind of what you said is we can make it spontaneous, which is great, but we can also make it deliberate, which is the whole point of online communication. If we want to be finding out more about each other for some reason, then we don't need to leave it until we're there with our cameras on. We can do other things, as you say. And yeah. First, we need to understand what remote work is. Then is the other thing, because we're not understanding what it is, then we're starting to bring people back into the office. So, yeah, I mean, that there's been a study. Let me just pull up the paper. This is quite recent. So this is Return to Office Mandates and Brain Drain, which is one of the authors is Mark Mao, who has done a lot of work around this.
Yeah, this is looking at the effect of turnover on return to office. And it won't surprise anybody, I don't think, to find that, you start telling people how and where they've got to do the work, that there's going to be pushback on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting paper because of that, because the authors said as well, they were like, look, we're talking about return to office and what it's doing, what it's not doing, but let's see what's going on. So they took, I think it was 54 companies in the end, quite big firms, so big financial and high-tech firms. And they looked around June 2023, and they looked at the 2 months before and the 2 months after from return to office mandates being sent out, being decided. And I think I really liked about this paper that we know exactly what they were measuring and when. It's not just anecdotes. They did look at people's LinkedIn profiles to find out what was going on. So again, the data set of people they were looking at is very reduced, but they explained that. And that's what they found. They found that the average turnover rate increased by 14% after the mandates. A lot of people are going, okay, bye.
Yep. I'm in demand. I'll take my skills elsewhere where I can have that flexibility that I've been enjoying for the last few years, and I've proved beyond doubt that I can remain productive and contented. And yeah, I want to keep that.
And there was an effect on hiring as well. So 23% longer to fill job vacancies. And what I really liked about this, though, is that what, of course, they're saying is that we're looking at the people probably that want to work remotely. But employees who prefer to work in person may be less likely to quit after the RTO mandates. And that can neutralize the negative effect of return to office. It's going to mean
a different group, basically. It's going to split hiring. But they also pointed out that it's affecting particularly female employees, skilled employees and senior employees. It's precisely the people who want that flexibility in their lives.
Yeah, but it wasn't about older. It was about mid and high career. And the reason they're saying they were leaving is because they can leave. It's easier for the higher tiers to leave. So that's also, if we're talking about...
Yes, it's the brain drain.
It's interesting because this brings us to, well, it's a shame that only the higher tiers feel like they have a choice. But that's still the case. So it's, for me, it's a shame that it's like that. But hey ho, this is the world. We can't solve all the...
there will always be competition. The best talent in the world will always be competitive. That's why we have a whole industry called recruitment, and they have to go and try and attract these people that they want in sought after niches. And it really proves that offering remote work, offering flexible work has become a differentiator. If there is a measurable brain drain, then it's going to affect how those companies innovate and become competitive, how they ultimately make profits. So it's something to think about for anybody publishing these mandates and trying to drag people back in.
Yeah, I think the problem is the mandate. I don't think the problem is the return to office. And the problem is...
If it's optional, that's fine.
Well, I think the problem is the return. Because one of the problems, for example, someone from Amazon who had their mandate issued in September 2024 to come back in 25, is that they'd been told, says the sources here, that they were going to be able to continue working from home. And now that promise has been broken. So I hope that as we move forward, these companies that have their mandates just become something that the company does. And therefore, there's no more broken promises.
Yes, if it's known that that's what it means to work at Amazon, then that's the job that you're hired on for, those are the terms, then you won't apply if it doesn't suit you. And you will end up with a slightly different demographic in the workforce, potentially. It's this kind of separation a bit, but at least everyone will have it with their eyes open. And this reflects we're still in transition.
Yes, exactly. It reflects we're still in transition. This is the issue. So hopefully you'll end up with people who want to work in an office, and the companies that offer other work will end up with the people who don't want to work in an office or who want a bit more of a... I mean, for me, I still don't have a problem with organizations not offering remote work. My issue is still that there's still no understanding of the differences of working in one place and another, and there's still no understanding that both can work. Yeah, we're still blaming remote. There's still this.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this research in a decade's time, once this sort of natural experiment has had a chance to play out, because we are still in transition. I think I saw something in the news this week that it's 5 years since the first reported case of COVID. And it's so, we are still really early in this. We had this big natural experiment of everybody in sort of March or whenever it was. I've repressed the memories, I'll keep them away. Suddenly having to work from home. Then we had the kind of straggling back, we had the pushback, and we're still in the state of flux that it's still news when Amazon comes out and says, right, everybody back to the office. So we haven't got any kind of norm yet. If this research is already identifying that there's a qualitative difference with the people who are choosing to go back or choosing to go elsewhere, then how's that gap going to widen? And I just think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how this plays out, what the workforce looks like. Is there going to be this kind of one tribe of suited and booted commuters in the office somewhere, and the rest these sort of really in-demand, flexible, freelancey type people sitting on the beach or wherever? It's going to be so interesting. Even if we're not podcasting every month, we'll just have to keep an eye on it and keep talking about it.
I'd love to see as well the research in other industries, because this is a high-tech and financial. It's still very specific, so it would be really
very
interesting.
High demand, very high, difficult to recruit in industries. So if you have got that really niche experience that you're the one who can build the AI fintech app or whatever, then you can have a lot more say over your price and your conditions. Whereas for a lot of workers, we know it's just not like that. And if this is the job, you're lucky to be offered it, take it or leave it, then a lot of people will have to take it.
I also wonder as well culturally what the view of working remotely, especially 100% of the time, is in the different industries. So I don't really know. So some of the reasons for that, the thing about collaboration is still like, oh, you have to collaborate. If you want to collaborate, you have to be in the office. And still anything that brings collaboration down, or a sense that people are not working as well together, it's very easy to blame location independence or people not being together. However, as you say, if we're still in transition, and we are, even if people were working from home and then they were going on to working remotely, it's still a transition because it's a different way of working. And we know that transitions and change bring with it all kinds of issues. And yet we're still, there's not a way, I mean, nobody seems to be working out why. It's not just location, because maybe people weren't talking to each other before either.
Yeah, or maybe they relied too much on that kind of spontaneously bumping into people or noticing things about people, or that proximity of hearing rumours about what's going on in an organisation and all that water cooler stuff. The fact is that most of the organisations being affected by this, they're called return to office mandates because they didn't have remote before, and they were never built for remote. They never had that embedded in their culture from the start, and they never had it embedded in their practice and their communications protocols and the tools they use. Even if they adapted really well, there must always have been this sense of this is an adaptation to our natural way of doing things and getting things done together. So perhaps that means there'll always be a legacy of this is harder. This is not quite as good collaborating. We have amazing tools now for doing these kind of collaborations, and to things like brainstorming or sharing files and working in real time together. Just the way that has transformed since I first tried to do it is quite mind-blowing. But if it's still seen as not as good as the gold standard of everybody in a conference room, then it's going to be very hard to overcome that, I think.
Yeah, I still have issues with the whole brainstorming thing, because I mean, I've been in some terrible brainstorming sessions and they do nothing for collaboration. All they do is generate ideas and then nothing happens afterwards. So, but this is cited. I mean, this is cited as one of those things where it's always like, oh, we can't do that. But have you looked at what that is bringing you? Because I think things like that, like being together for a concise period of time, the reason I think, okay, I don't have any data, so sorry, I'm going to just completely hypothesize, is that it's not about that wonderful ideas come up from it. It's not about wonderful collaboration processes. It's that people get on a high. And people enjoy suddenly being able to say what's on their mind quickly and build on each other's ideas. But that is a different quality that comes then to the collaboration. So if that's about feeling more comfortable, about being part of something that we think is going to be important, then that's what we need to, if you want, recreate.
Yeah.
But collaboration is not just that. It's about doing the work in between, and that you need to facilitate, and that you can facilitate in different places. You can be in the office or you can be wherever.
Better to do that in a way that's more persistent and documented and structured and asynchronous. And the best remote first organisations devote a lot of time and resource to that synergistic face time, whether they call it retreats or one-to-ones or off-sites or whatever. They bring their people together, often several times a year, often at amazing sounding kind of events and locations. We don't have to, say, oh, it's not the same as everybody in the room shouting at somebody and somebody trying to write it all down. Well, as you say, that's not always the most productive way to innovate anyway.
Yeah, and I think this is the main thing, is that the social and the work and everything when we're in real time together can get mixed. But we're away from each other, we can segment it a little bit more. And I think that if we have a strategy for working apart from each other, it needs that. Whereas in the office, everything happens because it's just one big human experience. Whereas in remote, well, if we're going to be social, let's be social. Of course, the social element is there anyway, as soon as we're having interactions. Even in a Trello board, we are, in a way, for me at least, I'm socializing still. There's still an element. As soon as I'm creating with another person, that for me is socializing. But I'm socializing through the work. So I still think that anyway. Could go on forever.
It's a tricky one. I've been to a lot of events this year which are face-to-face, and I've really enjoyed going to them. They've come at a big cost to me in terms of, well, actually literal money, but also energy and time away from my own projects and things like that. But there is something very powerful about being physically present, just in terms of learning, for example. You can buy great online training, but there's something about being actually in the room where knowledge is being imparted that makes at least some of it go in by osmosis, that it won't on a screen. Forget it. It doesn't matter how good the training is and how much you put your phone down and really try to pay attention to it. There is something organic about absorbing knowledge and emotion and information from people. And it's kind of really being able to, discern what that is and make sure you do enough of that at the times you are together, because you can't replicate that by sitting in Zoom meetings all day. And it's really awful to try and do that when you could be using that time in Zoom meetings to actually be productive and collaborate asynchronously and save up for the time that you can all get together and have a nice weekend together.
I am going to offer a theory for that, and it's attention. Mm-hmm. For me, it's got nothing to do with whether we're in person, whether we're in real time, or how the transfer of, you mentioned emotion, how the transfer of emotion, the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of whatever is happening, that tends to be, I mean, if you are all in a room together and people are talking, but half of the people have their heads burrowed in a phone or behind their laptop and doing something else, none of that is going to happen. But the thing is that it's still much more acceptable, even personally, to withdraw when we are behind the screen and our attention goes somewhere else. Whether still, because of, for whatever reasons, 10,000 of them, when we are in a room together with other people, unless our phone is in our hand or something like this, or unless we're having a really difficult time and can't concentrate, our attention is with the people in the room.
Yes.
And that's what we need to decide, whether we leave it like that or whether we take that attention and bring it into other areas as well, very, very deliberately. There is, of course, that screen, and it's very difficult to be looking at screens, whether you're reading or whether you're interacting with someone. So there is that as well. I mean, the comfort of being in a room with other people is much higher. It's much better, much more comfortable for the mind, for the brain, for just how you interact with the world. So there is that. I mean, there's so many of those things. So as you know, I've been studying to be a Pilates instructor, and I did 6 days in person, and I really liked it because, one, it's about space and body and things like that, and it's just nice to be sitting in a room on the floor with my tracksuit bottoms rather than having to sit behind a camera. So
yeah, and it's such an embodied practice. It's just totally about the physicality of being there.
So, and I think that, you know, what you're saying, though, is that both experiences are so valid. And if we just take a little bit of time to understand what we're getting, what we're really getting from both experiences, then we can start to...
Or what's missing from that online interaction? Is there a way we can filter that attention? Or something that puts us in a more way to immerse our attention more in that specific interaction, so we haven't got any other tabs or apps open. Like, my sleep quality improved a lot when I invested in a separate Kindle device for reading on rather than trying to read on my iPad, because it doesn't have any WhatsApps or any LinkedIn alerts or anything else going on there. You know, it's just me and the book, and that really makes the difference. So maybe we need something like that for meetings.
And I have a neighbor who always reads, it's obvious he reads his emails on his phone while he's doing something else. So even asynchronous, we love asynchronous because it gives us this space, but actually sometimes half the attention is going into that as well. In all environments, it's the one thing that for me makes a difference with how we communicate with other people and how we build relationships is actually how much we're there for the other person, regardless. It's not about remote, it's about attention.
Yes, I agree, particularly as the mother of 2 Gen Z daughters who seem to be growing up in this world of utterly fragmented attention and distraction. You know, I don't know what their work future will look like, heaven knows, but I do wonder about how their ability to attend to one single source of input that doesn't change to a different video every 30 seconds is, how's that going to work when they hit the workforce?
My God, if we think about generational differences, we're about to hit a huge one. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yes, the TikTok generation are coming into the office.
Wow.
Good luck with that, with your return to office mandates for people who've never set foot in one.
Right, well, we've done that one to death. It's all more or less of the same. I think that the isolation aspect as well, the fact that, I mean, I've heard this a lot, the disconnection and isolation in places where nothing is being put in place. And the big problem is that people who want to do something about it don't feel like they don't have the time. No one has the time. I mean, I've heard this from different places of, you know, big changes happening. And of course, the big changes are happening. We don't have the time to do anything. And the more we're burying our head, you know, with our head down in our work, again, less time we have to be deliberate and intentional. And therefore, being away from each other's is more difficult.
And who's going to fix it? Whose job is it? Is HR supposed to do something, or operations, or IT? Who's going to put these structures? And it really is, it's so much harder to change things. I think if you're designing an organisation from the ground up as remote first, that's completely different. You can embed those practices and that culture from the start. But to try and muddle through it, it doesn't feel like a lot of places have really improved on what they put in place in 2020. And of course, that's not working long term. Like your friend saying they were in meetings all day on Zoom.
That's a really good point, is that before the pandemic, we used to say, okay, remote does work in large organizations. And we always cited, there's not that many that were remote first and then grew really huge. But we always said, automatic, for example. But I think there is that difference of, even if they weren't remote right from the beginning, but, there came a point where they were quite small when they were fully remote. And like with lots of companies who've been set up as remote, they've been quite small and then they've grown. And as you said, the culture was already there for these kind of things to have the attention of leadership as well. And now we've got to a place where there are large organizations, but they don't have the infrastructure for connection specifically. And it's really difficult to introduce anything because of the scale and the size. And people don't have time to do the things on their own. So this is really, it's so tricky. I feel really sorry.
Yeah, we just need to burn it all down and start again.
Oh my God.
What to do, what's needed is just retrofitting it is so difficult. Like we did our kitchen at home this year, and we spent ages thinking, well, could we just change the worktops and change the cupboards? And what if we painted the tile? And in the end, the builder just threw up his hands and said, look, we've got to rip it out. It's what you're suggesting is so much more expensive and complicated. And you want to move the sink as well, right? Look, let's just get a skip and a sledgehammer. And he was right, And it's just so much harder emotionally to do that. So, I don't know how an organisation does that, because you can't just rip everything out and chuck it out.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And to be honest, I think as well, and if we just move into hybrid for a second, let me just see, I had some interesting statistics from the UK coming around hybrid. And I think that is the kind of stepping stone. And the other thing, of course, that we should be saying is that the return to office mandates, there's a few hitting the headlines, but actually a lot of organizations are not having these big mandates. And the mandatory arrangements sometimes are about coming in a certain dates into the office, which a lot of people don't have an issue with, because that's different. And I think it's very easy for, well, especially for me, because I get all my news from LinkedIn now, is that it's really easy just to get drowned by these very terrible practices that are happening from a few. I think Nicholas Bloom was saying this as well.
Yeah,
so that's really,
it's true.
So I'm still working on that book about remote work and Shakespeare, and I do have a chapter on hybrid where I talk about Rabobank and also the law practice that I had a guest on, and I can't remember the name of the practice. I know his name is David. But these were two organizations that were already thinking about how to change the use of the office and incorporating more remote work and some more flexible work into their organizations, and actually then took the pandemic to just build on that. And I think there were a lot of organizations already doing that. So I think that's worth remembering, that some people have been doing it. They've been actually been able to transition rather than having to not do it or to have to start from zero. So that's really, really nice to hear and remember. And I just found some statistics from the Office of National Statistics, the UK, 11th of November 2024. It's like, wow, that's quite new. I don't have the statistics I wanted, which is how many people. But there's a lot of people working, just knowledge workers doing 50% of time away. But this statistics, why I liked it, was that actually they looked at the improved staff well-being. If for nothing else, because you can just picture, I'm going to go into complaining mode again. I can just picture all the companies that are having problems with this having like huge well-being initiatives.
Yes.
That you can sign up to, when actually people who've responded to this survey who are working at least 1 day a week away from the office are saying that on that given day they spent an average of 24 minutes more on sleep and rest 24 minutes, that's quite a lot. It's almost half an hour.
Yeah,
and 15 yeah, and 15 minutes more on exercise, sports and well-being on their respective day staying at home compared with those who worked away from home. You've got two sides, because a lot of people, I was talking to a friend the other day who doesn't like working from home, and he said, I don't move if I stay at home.
Yeah, that's always a risk. And it's just pushes that intentionality out onto the team. This workforce that are, if that was over a week of 5 days, that's nearly 2 hours more sleep. And how much more well-being and productivity are you going to get as a result of that? And encouraging people to engage in these activities and exercise, maybe share that, maybe do something collective around that. There's so much you could do, because you're right, I'm sure they have these people employed specifically to be responsible for that well-being piece in the office, so they could be adaptive as well and help people encourage those healthy habits. They'll surely be more productive and
and happier. Even maybe they're not more productive, but maybe they're happier.
Well, happy people are productive if they take joy in their work and their creativity and take pride in an organisation that encourages and supports that. The outcomes can only be positive, surely. So we didn't moan at all.
Sorry,
we didn't moan at all. We talked about that in a really uplifting way.
There's still remote work, and especially working from home, it has so many things to it, like good and bad things, and it's such an individual thing that it's great that we're having these statistics showing us something very specific. I mean, you can probably find the same statistics but showing the opposite view. Again, we cannot blame remote work, for example, for people being not exercising, for example, when actually it's what you say, it's about intentionality as well. Now, there is one more thing that we're blaming remote work for, and I think remote work and working from home specifically might be to blame, but is there a need to blame? And is this fact that I think you brought it up, which is about the wider economic effects and how businesses that are doing badly because people are working from home.
Yeah, I mean, ecosystems evolve around what's normal in any given environment. And, again, thinking back to the COVID times of 5 years ago and going into a city centre then, it was so weird because there were no commuters, there was no air pollution, there was no Ubers, and everything was dead. And if those people haven't come back, then of course it's had a knock-on effect. We can say, oh yes, the big hedge funds who own the commercial real estate, well, they deserve to get what's coming. But it's not just them, of course. It is the Uber drivers and the dry cleaners and the guy at the newsagents. And those are small businesses, they're entrepreneurs. And I have had a lot of people, I've known people personally who are affected by this, and they have quite a hate for remote work and work from home because it's killed their business, because it evolved solely to serve that particular need. The fact that, and they built everything around those 2 rush hours of the day that people were whooshing through and trying to waylay them with the perfect latte or whatever that met a specific train, and then shifting to more to go when that train was due and things like that. And everything revolved around that act of commuting. So if you take that away, it's going to have a wider effect. And I think this is one of those things that, of course, you don't think about that. You say, well, actually, I'm going to let my team are all going to be able to work where they want or something. I think, well, that's great. But these things somehow need to get sorted out. And it takes a lot of time. I think it's going to take years, whether those people move their cafes to a more low rent, perhaps suburban location where people are strolling to a co-working or a gym, or they can go and work in the cafe, make it laptop friendly. I think a lot of the people affected in this way, they're very entrepreneurial by nature. They're people who've seen a need and responded to it. And that needs changed now. People like dry cleaners, people don't wear suits and workwear in the same way that they used to,
Yeah, it's also true.
So there's less kind of cleaning product pollution going into the air, and less people having to get their coffee spots off their expensive jackets or whatever, because we're all slobbing around in hoodies at home for at least half the week. Then that's all going to change. But those are small businesses, those are entrepreneurs, and I think they'll figure it out. I think that it's a little bit of a red herring. It's like where the example I was saying to you before we hit record, it's like people say, well, if everybody stopped eating meat, what would happen to all the pigs and sheep? Have you thought about that? And it's like, well, it's kind of the problem is the wrong way around. One of them's there because of the other. And when you take the cause away, yes, there'll be a transition, but things will kind of chill out over time, and especially if people look to the long view. Okay, well, what kind of small business will be needed in this area in future? What if people actually come and live in these city centres again? Maybe they'll need evening restaurants instead of morning coffee or something like that. And, things will take time to shake out. And a lot of these effects are quite hard to measure and predict as well.
It's reminding me a lot, like with so many other things, of the generative AI introduction. And I think that the issue, again, usually ecosystems shift, but this has been a very fast shift I'm still talking about remote work, and suddenly the pulling away of people who used to use an area and now they don't use it as often, if at all. So I think as well that there's been the lack of time to understand what was happening. There was also this, not just that, is that we always, and I was one of the first people who thought that actually things were going to go back to how they were before the pandemic, and they didn't. So it's only now that we would have expected things to be like they were before. I think it's only now that people are realizing, hang on, we're not going back to how we were. And I think maybe this is the issue that's clouding everything, is that we've been waiting for things to settle in a way that they haven't settled. They've shifted.
Yeah, and they're still shifting. And I think that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Well, because we don't know what to do.
No, but some people have always been more comfortable with change, or more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty.
Yeah,
I think more kind of, it's whether you feel, well, this is exciting and challenging and interesting, or whether you think, I don't like this, I want this sort of, and I think it is, people can't stay in that state for 5 years. And most people have got to a point now where they either like it or they don't like it, but think that pretty much what they're looking at is what they've got. Some of these changes are very slow. You can't see a tree growing, or something. You can't see where's a high street declining. It might be somewhere you visit once a year and you think, oh, that's now this is closed and that's closed. And I haven't been into central London this year. I don't think. I don't know what it's like walking through the city of London now, how different it is. And it's hard for people to adjust to. It's hard for people to notice, and maybe they don't always recognise where this feeling of uncertainty about it all is even coming from. As a result, there's still just a sense of, well, things aren't back to normal yet. And you crave that, how things were, because that at least that was known and familiar and comfortable.
Yeah, so I feel really sorry, because my business has had to change for the way that life has changed, and lots of industries change. And what we didn't expect was the coffee industry to change, and suddenly neighborhood places doing better than places in the middle of town. And I think it's really tough, but I think that it's just been such a change in the ecosystem and everything that has been quick and unexpected. But we can't blame remote work for them.
We really can't.
We not for the negative, for all the negative things.
And remote work can't take the credit for regenerating our high streets either, and the fact that people are going to local co-workings and their local communities and so on. These are all just intersecting factors of stuff that's going on, and change is a constant. We've never had a community or a society that's somehow set in stone. We just can't always see these different factors interacting. And some of these things move very fast, like a business can go bust 1 week when they haven't got enough money to pay their staff. And then other things, like an office leasing cycle, might be 10 years. So you're not going to see that they actually close that building down yet, because it hasn't come up since the pandemic lockdown. So there's still change to come, and we will just have to see how that looks.
It's interesting, because one of the things about using remote work as a tool for socioeconomic change was about shifting the masses in the city centres to the broader rural areas. And actually, I think I'm quite terrible because I don't own a business in town, but I'm quite happy to see that some of it has happened. However, of course, the way in which it's happened is also, well, unexpected, because rents haven't gone down in London. Rents have gone up in the suburbs. So because it's you just can't. There's just so many things going on. It's it's tricky.
And in Spain, we're starting to see a real backlash against the remote workers and digital nomads, and it's pushing prices up in desirable coastal areas. And where that people are going to these smaller, and it's great for the people who own holiday properties, and they're filling them out of season and year round and things. But the little villages in the middle of Spain are still deserted, and it hasn't done anything for those communities, and it just means that no one can afford an apartment in Valencia anymore.
Oh, it is very depressing. But let's not blame remote work. It's
exciting and interesting, and we're observing these shifts in society and trying to figure out where it's all going and what it's going to mean, and how we can observe and comment on it, and hopefully talk about it in a positive way.
So what listeners will have noticed is that we're not making any predictions. I am done with predictions about what's going to happen within 6 months in the world of work and in our little bubble of understanding all the new things, whereas there's people outside our little bubble that don't know anything about all the new things happening. So that's okay. Yeah. So I'm done with predictions for the new year.
We normally do try and do predictions, don't we? But I think you're right. This year, there's just been way too much change in sort of economically, socially, geopolitically, but most of all technologically, that's going to impact on work in ways we can't begin to predict yet. So,
Right. Well, Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com if you want to get in touch with me. Maya, what email address shall we give listeners?
Don't email me. You can find me at remoteworkeurope.eu. There's a contact form there, or LinkedIn, and all the usual places. But no email.
Excellent. It is a problem because now that all the platforms are doing transcripts, I never used to put my email online, and now all the transcripts will have it, but never mind. It's not like I've been getting lots of hate mail or anything. Anyway, listeners, have a wonderful start to 2025 and see you on the other side.
Bye for now, everybody. Thanks for listening to the end of this one. And yes, here's to great things in the new year.
A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. We know there are many other shows for you to choose from. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.